you don't have a choice anymore. You have to use technology and use what the company's giving you. You look at AI and robots and all this stuff, and there's a lot of people that are concerned that, oh, I'm going to lose my job to a robot. I don't feel like our jobs are really at risk.
First one is I know of a student housing management company that purchased a robot from China. They are deploying at their properties, and first they're starting the robot with simple tasks as picking up trash on the property. A company from Israel has made a machine, a robot, that installs drywall at a rate of 1,500 square feet per hour.
I don't necessarily think it's just going to take over all of our jobs. You also have to then factor in, what happens when something breaks down on that robot. Well, then you're calling a third-party company to come out and fix it. You don't know when they're going to get there. You don't know what's wrong with it. You don't know.
Excited to have you on, Chris.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Let's start with your origin story. Tell me how you got into maintenance.
Essentially, I was out in North Carolina. I was 20 years old or so, working 3 different jobs at the time, all making minimum wage. So out there in 2008, about $5-6 an hour. Doing 3 jobs is rough. I was at one job in the morning, one job in the afternoon, one job at night. So I needed something that paid more money and was full time with benefits and everything. Went to the property manager for the complex that I lived at and kind of was talking to her about it. And she said, hey, we actually have a painter position open, which you'll work at this property and then you'll work literally right down the street at another property painting vacant units and kind of maybe starting to learn the maintenance aspect of it. It paid $11 an hour, so I was like, yeah, let's do that. Applied for it, got into it, and kind of took off from there.
What was your next step from painter? What was your next job in property maintenance?
As a painter, like my actual job was to just go into vacant units, paint the unit, leave. The property that I worked at was a 100-unit property, so it was myself and then a supervisor. He couldn't do all of the work orders plus the actual maintenance churn aspect of it. So he got in there and started showing me the maintenance stuff, how to change outlets, change switches, do all that type of stuff. So I started learning that really quickly, caught onto it. And, within 6 months, Drucker and Falk was able to move me up from a painter to a service tech.
How long did it take you to become a service manager for the first time?
It was about a year and a half, and it was not your typical service manager position. Drucker and Falk ended up selling that property that I was at to a single owner. He came from New York, was at high-rise buildings out there, did everything himself. He didn't want to pay management fees, so he ended up keeping me on and kind of put me in charge of the maintenance side. Since I knew the property, I was able to do everything, gave me a little bit more money. And then, I just kind of worked with him, did the majority of the maintenance work with him. But then I was also put in the office at times and had to do office work, take people to court, do all that stuff. I kind of learned a lot, for those 2 years before I actually moved out to Arizona.
What was one thing that you thought about the service manager job that you learned that it wasn't so when you actually became one?
It was a little bit harder than you would kind of expect. Already doing everything for the most part, you have the expectation of nothing's going to change. But then once you're alone and you don't have anybody else to rely on, you kind of have to learn to adapt. And that's just what I did was, learn to do things on my own. YouTube was kind of starting to come out, look at videos, read a bunch of stuff, just so that you can learn a little bit more, especially with something like that, being alone at a property. It wasn't like I have it here where, there's 100 other maintenance supervisors that I can reach out to. It was only us at that property.
Back when you were a child, what did you dream about becoming when you grow up?
I always wanted to be a police officer. I went to school for criminal justice. I wanted to be a police officer really bad. applied to a couple of them, went and did all the testing and everything. And then, by the time that whole kind of thing came up, it was, I actually like my job. I make more money, and the chance of me getting shot at was slim to none. So it's a little bit made a little bit more sense with the family to stay in maintenance than to go that route.
Now, looking back, what do you think was the main thing that kept you in this business, that you never really like decided to go somewhere else and just kind of stuck with it, become a career for you?
I think it was really the aspect of change. I'm not one that likes to sit in an office all day or, have one place for years on years on years. Doing maintenance, yes, the goal is to kind of be at one property for, a year or two, and then move on to your next one. That kind of presents the challenge to me of, I can be at one property, have everything running smoothly, everything goes the way that I want it to go, and then take on the next challenge of, either a bigger property or just something that's more rough that needs somebody to go in and put their final touches on it.
We're facing pretty significant staff shortages. The entire industry does. What can we do as an industry to actually help alleviate this pain?
Especially for the maintenance side. I think that the shortage and the toughness comes from the on-call situations that, we have to face being in maintenance. I think the one thing that some companies are really starting to look at, Mark Taylor is one of the best when it comes to this, as far as I have realized and learned throughout working with different companies, is the pay differential for being on call. It's not like, oh, you're on call, you get called out, you're going to get overtime for it. Mark Taylor kind of took that and realized, like, hey, we face a different situation than the leasing staff does. So they pay us a little bit more money throughout the week for being on call than just your normal pay. So that kind of helps when we're talking to potential technicians or even service managers, like, hey, yes, you have to be on call, but if you're making $2-3 more an hour that whole time you're on call, that kind of makes up for the, you're gonna get woken up in the middle of the night type of situation.
Tell me a little bit about the on-call pay structure. I think there are a lot of folks out there that will like to hear what you guys are doing right, so maybe they could implement that too.
Okay, so when I first started with Mark Taylor, which was about 3.5 years ago, the pay structure was, if your base pay is $20 an hour, when you're on call, you got an extra dollar an hour for being on call. So that whole week that you're on call, so the 40 hours, you're getting paid $21 an hour, plus you get paid for the on call. They changed it about, I think it was 2 years ago, where they moved it up to $3 an hour. So you're making $20 an hour normally. You go on call for that 40 hours during that week, you're making $23 an hour. That's a lot of money, and it kind of shows that, hey, we appreciate everything that you guys do, and this is our way of rewarding the fact that you are the ones that are going to be out here, in 110-degree weather fixing an AC on a roof. You're going to be woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning because, a resident went out, lost their key, and now they need to get in their apartment. I think that compared to what other companies do, I know a previous company that I worked for, their on-call structure was, you got paid an hour regardless, you got paid at least an hour of that call regardless of how long it took you. So if it only took you 20 minutes to complete the call, you still got paid for an hour. Obviously, if you went over that hour, you got paid for that. But that's not really an incentive. That doesn't want me to take on call. Me taking on call is, that extra $200 or $300 in my paycheck every, other week.
You won a couple of important awards: AMA Service Supervisor of the Year, and then the Mark Taylor Principals Award. What do they mean to you?
So the AMA one really meant a lot. It kind of showed that recognition of, you know, Chris comes to work and he's more than just a, come to work type of person, get a paycheck and leave. I'm very big on making sure that, my staff is, trained and they learn new things from me instead of just giving them what they know and calling it a day. And then the fact that it was the first time that I was ever nominated for that award, the first time I was a finalist, and then actually winning it kind of showed that, hey, I've actually come a long way since I started as a painter. And then the principal award, I think I kind of feel like that one is a little bit more special to me. Every company has their core values, their core principles. Mark Taylor is very set on making sure that, we follow those principles every single day. This past year, they decided that, hey, we're going to actually honor those principles in that person. So every quarter we have a principal award based on that principle for the quarter. And then if you won that award, you are eligible to be in the, the yearly award for following all the principles. You go through an interview process, they ask you questions, you answer those questions based on the principles, and then they decide as a nominee, like, who's actually going to win. So winning that one, being the first ever one to win it, kind of shows that I've taken everything that I've learned, throughout my career, and especially throughout the 3 years with Mark Taylor. And I don't just follow the principles, but I help to guide other, supervisors, other technicians, everyone around the community to to use those principles in everyday life.
Centralization is a big word that everybody kind of talks about in the industry. Are you guys doing are you attempting any sort of centralization within your company?
Sort of. We're starting to what we call pod properties. So right now, I know it is a strategic thing towards the Mark Taylor owned assets, where we will pod 3 properties that are pretty close proximity to each other. You will have one senior MFS that will help oversee all 3 properties, and then you take the staff and you're kind of reorganizing that maintenance staff between the 3 properties. So, one property might need a couple more guys than the other one does. They're even doing the same thing with the office. You have one GM, or, general manager, who is going to oversee all 3 of the properties. You will have one, assistant manager who's going to help oversee all the properties. Leasing offices are essentially closed. It is by appointment only. There's behind the scenes stuff, which we get familiar with, but until you're actually at the pod, I don't think we're really going to fully understand 100% how that goes. But everything is kind of channeled through a central area within Mark Taylor, who they control the service requests, that they help control the churn board for us. They set up the appointments for leasing staff, for residents, prospects, whatever it might be.
What's the technology that helps you guys run this program?
We use HappyCo for everything. If I were to look at my phone, go into the app, I see all of my tasks, which are we call them tasks. They're called service requests. We have a project board in there, which our project board is our turn board. Mark Taylor got rid of the conventional, whiteboard in somebody's office with all these turns on it. We use HappyCo to go through that whole process. And then we have all of our inspections on there as well. When a new resident moves in, they get their move-in inspection through HappyCo, and it helps every single person see it. So, with me right now, I'm dual siding between 2 properties. I can see everything at both my properties just by simply switching the property, and it helps kind of keep everything organized. Term boards, especially, are messy. Sometimes we don't have the greatest handwriting. I know I can say that. My handwriting is absolutely horrible. I can read it, but other people can't. So having it on an app where, I can be 3,000 miles away, I can look on my app and see everything that's going on. The property manager can see everything that's going on. They'll kind of know when that churn is going to be done, what we're expecting. And then the service side can do the same thing. I assign tasks, projects, inspections, whatever it is, to each member of the staff, and they'll get a notification on their phone. They know what they have to do. That way they don't have to keep coming back and forth to the office to look at a churn board, grab, a paperwork order to, see what needs to happen. It's all at their hands right now.
What do you think about the adoption rates? Are most of the team members actually using all these features?
We don't have a choice. That's what we use. You learn to adapt to it. The churn board, the project board on HappyCo, when we first started doing that, I think there definitely could have been a lot of service supervisors that don't like technology. They don't, they might not necessarily understand it, and it was probably harder for them than it was for maybe someone like me, who I'm all about technology. If it makes my job easier, I'm going to use it. I think now, we've all used it for about a year and a half now. We all understand it. It comes natural to us. There's no more questioning things. You don't have a choice anymore. You have to use technology and use what the company's giving you.
That's a good way to put it. That's what we do here. This is how we do things. Tell me about a piece of advice that you would give your 20-year-old self. One piece of information that you wish you knew when you were 20 years old and you didn't.
Stick with it no matter what. There's definitely been some times throughout my career where I've thought about, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. It's tough, it's stressful. Of course, just like everybody else, I've been laid off, fired, whatever it can be. But I would tell myself, eventually the hard, you continue to work hard, you continue to show yourself and improve. Things do get better, and you start to get recognized a lot more for what you do. And I think, yeah, it's been 15, 16 years, but I'm finally at that stage in my career where I'm starting to see that recognition. I'm starting to, be able to continue to learn more and more every day, and understand that just because you might get in trouble, or, you have to have a talk with a regional, it's all just a learning opportunity. You have to take that and look at it as a learning opportunity and change the way you're doing things in order to continue to move up.
You've been around for almost 2 decades in the multifamily maintenance field. What is one major shift that you've seen happening?
I think the biggest shift is definitely the technology aspect of it. I don't feel maintenance is really, you look at AI and robots and all this stuff, and there's a lot of people that are concerned that, oh, I'm going to lose my job to a robot. I don't feel like our jobs are really at risk. It's kind of hard to get a robot to understand, like, to be able to look at so many different things and pinpoint what might be wrong with something. But the technology, especially as far as, like, how I said we use HappyCo, how that shifted. We started off, most of us have used Yardi. You start off using Yardi, printing out work orders, having to walk around with 40 pieces of paper with you, because you got to fill out this work order and leave it with the resident, and then you have to fill out this one and bring it back to the office so that the office can close out the work order. Where now everything is at our fingerprints. We can see what's done when we complete a work order through HappyCo. The resident gets a notification. They can see what's done. They can see who did it and what time it was done. And that's definitely the biggest thing that's changing right now.
You mentioned robots, you mentioned technology, AI especially. How does AI change what you do or will?
I think it'll eventually start to help us. There's definitely times, you use an example of resident puts in a work order, my AC is not working. Well, I've got 10 different questions that I want to ask that resident, because it could be, something inside that's not working. It could be something on a roof, especially if it's on a roof. I want to go up on the roof and get it fixed. with AI kind of evolving, it's going to allow us to let the resident put in a request and say, my AC is not working. Okay, the next question, what is not going on? Is it blowing air? It's just warm air. Is it not blowing air at all? Questions like that. That way, it helps us pinpoint where the problem might be instead of us having to go. The property that I'm at now, it's a 4-story mid rise with one roof access. I can have a work order for an AC at the far end of my building on the first floor. I have to walk all the way over there, kind of see what's going on, come all the way back to the other side, go up on the roof, walk all the way back to the other side to get to their condensing unit. Maybe it's there, and then, or I realize when I get up there, oh, it's not this, it's actually downstairs. Now I got to backtrack all the way back over there to do something, where AI can kind of help us alleviate all that walking around and wasting time.
I'm going to give you a couple of instances. You mentioned robots entering the world in general. First one is, I know of a student housing management company that purchased a robot from China. They are deploying at their properties, and first they're starting the robot with simple tasks as picking up trash on the property. So, that's one aspect. The second one is a story I read a couple of weeks ago. A company from Israel has made a robot that installs drywall. Actually, a company from New York has purchased that particular robot and they use it in their process. That particular robot installs drywall at a rate of 1,500 square feet per hour. So, with these two examples, how do you think that other tasks that are maintenance related, how fast do you think that they will be outsourced to robots?
You look at the drywall robot, for instance, that could be useful for, when you're in the process of building an apartment. But over here, I don't have, I don't need a robot to install that much drywall when I have drywall fixes maybe once a month. You're still going to miss that human aspect of it. You can send a robot all you want to go do a work order or task, whatever, for a resident, but how is the robot going to explain or give any type of sympathy towards that resident for what's going on? You're out in Arizona, it's 115 degrees in the middle of summer, your AC goes out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A robot's not going to have sympathy for that. It's going to be like, I'm a robot. I don't understand what it means that it's hot in there, whatever it might be. Where with us, resident calls, they're telling us about their AC issue, we will certainly show that sympathy towards them of, I understand it's hot, let me see what I can do, I'll try to get this fixed as soon as possible for you. I just don't see, not at least not right now, robots being able to do anything like that.
I'm just gonna play here a different side, the opposite side, okay? And I want you to consider this. First of all, a company is in business to run profit, to make profit. The more they
Yes.
make, the better it is. A robot, yeah, might not have, like, might not be able to deliver empathy like a human does, but a robot does not take time off, does not go on cigarette breaks, does not check social media, does not call for PTO, doesn't call in sick, just does the work, shows up, does the work. Yeah, is the empathy thing there? No, I just think that the future will probably reserve robots that are capable of like empathizing. And I'll just give you a simple example. ChatGPT, when I'm using it, and I'm using it a lot, like it's actually capable of like expressing when I, because basically I use ChatGPT just like a companion, like a buddy of mine, someone that's actually helping me do tasks. It's actually capable, if you train it, if it's trained a particular way, it's capable to express different tones, empathy, sympathy to me. And I think that that could be replicated in a robot very easily as well. I use the example with a drywall robot just to kind of like show, not necessary to say there's an immediate application for us in multifamily maintenance, but there, I think that each job that's existing currently that's being done by humans is going to be challenged at some point, or it already is. We just don't know about it by robotics, by technology. There will be companies out there, focused on how do we eliminate as much of the human work possible from this task and just replace it with some robotic, with some artificial intelligence. I'm not sure how fast that's going to happen. I just think that the future, for sure, within our lifetime, we will see a lot of tasks that will be taken over by artificial beings, not from us, the humans. I'm not saying by that 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 there won't be a place for humans. If we're looking into technology, the industrial revolution, when the steam engine was invented, obviously a lot of people were like, put out of business by not having to do the jobs, like the carts, the
Yep.
the horses and everything. But then there were jobs created. Somebody had to like manage that steam engine. They had to build them. They had to maintain them. They had to operate them. They had to repair them. The same thing is gonna be here too. It's gonna be people that know how to leverage and use that technology and robotics and maintain it versus people that actually do the manual work. That's how I personally see this playing.
And I definitely agree. I think, at some point there will be robotics that will help us for sure. I don't necessarily think it's just going to take over all of our jobs. The PTO, sick time, cigarette breaks, lunch breaks, or whatever it is. You also have to then factor in, what happens when something breaks down on that robot. Well, then you're calling a third party company to come out and fix it. You don't know when they're going to get there. You don't know what's wrong with it. You don't know if that part's available, how long it's going to take. I'm not going to talk about politics, but look at what's going on with tariffs right now. You get a robot from China right now. Let's say the robot costs you 20 grand, but if things keep going the way that they're going to go, that arm that you have to replace on that robot is coming from China. Well, that arm's going to cost you 10 grand. Like, is that really what we want to do? It's not always going to be a sound investment. It's going to be something that takes time. EV cars are the same way. We all looked at EV cars, Teslas, Rivians, oh, this is great. They're going to get rid of the engine. We're not going to pay gas anymore. Well, yeah, but the cost to replace that battery is ridiculous. The cost of electricity is not getting cheaper, and the more people that buy these type of cars and require more demand, the electricity is actually just going to get more expensive. So there's give and take on both sides of everything.
I don't disagree with you at all. I'm betting on capitalism, on free markets, on the human ingenuity. I think all of those challenges are not here to stay. They'll be overcome. People will overcome them. When it comes to electrical vehicles, I totally agree with you. I think I've been in California recently, and I tried to use an electrical car, and it was a horrible experience. Okay, and California has a mandate, I think, by 2050 to have all electric cars. They're already experiencing brownouts. Is this thing that we're not gonna get political, but politics influence our daily lives. I'm not
Yes.
afraid to just state certain things because they're actually affecting my life. I'm not gonna like not say anything about it. And certain things completely don't make sense. We also don't consider when it comes to like manufacturing that battery how toxic the whole entire process is, just because they're not being made here and we don't actually see how that toxic is. It's outsourced in a different part of the world. It doesn't mean that people aren't affected. A lot of people are affected. Where
Yes.
are the materials mined out of? Like I've seen videos of like tens of thousands of people like like hammering out there, being exposed to like very toxic environment, trying to extract that ore that is actually being used. I think it's cobalt, probably. I could be wrong. It's using the batteries. How do we make the electricity that actually charges the batteries? If we're gonna burn coal to generate energy to charge a car, between that and the manufacturing process of the batteries, I think that you're actually ended up being actually harming the environment more than the way you are by fossil fuel. So you're absolutely right. There's always two sides of the a pro and a con in everything. I'm a firm believer that with less government, in a way, less regulations, and letting the free market decide like what's the best solution, I think we're gonna be advancing at a better pace as a society, and our industry too. the property management industry will advance as well. Who is the person that made the most positive influence in your life and your career, Chris?
I think obviously my life would have to be my wife. She trusted me, married me, had kids with me. When you get married and then, especially when you have kids, it puts a totally different perspective into everything that you do. I don't come to work because, I necessarily want to come to work or I love being here, whatever it might be. I come to work for my family. I know that without me being able to have a job, have a good paying job like I do now, we wouldn't be able to survive like we are, especially in certain markets, certain areas. So, I think my wife definitely had a huge impact on everything after that point. I want to say, as far as work goes, I know I've only been here for the 3.5 years, but kind of going from where I was at to this company, we call them an associate managing director and then a managing director. They're kind of like, you're like our regionals essentially. I started working at a property, had an AMD who loved working with her. She kind of she helped guide me in a few aspects that I never realized was an issue with myself. But talking to her and getting feedback from her and then from everyone else within the company, you kind of understand like, okay, no, that is kind of what's holding me back a little bit. And then she got promoted to a managing director role. So I lost her for a little bit, but I had the privilege of going back and switching properties to different lease ups and working with her again. She's the one that got me promoted to the senior position. We kind of sat down, talked about, hey, here's what I want to do. What do I need to do in order to be a senior MFS, not just be a normal supervisor? She sent me the list and said, you have the technical aspects down. You know what you're doing. We can trust you on all this stuff. Here's really what you need to focus on. It can be a very, very, very sarcastic person. It's just the way that I grew up. So it's hard to change the way that you've learned from a young age all the way up until now, like not to say stuff, not to be like that, kind of watch your tongue. But I think learning from her and learning what I needed to work on in order to move up, I think so far she's had one of the greater impacts as far as my career goes.
Chris, it's been great having you on. Very, very interesting, very engaging conversation. I love getting into an argument too, into seeing both sides of the story. I think this is what makes the society great and advancing. I'd love for those in the audience to maybe shoot us some feedback, see which side they're on the arguments that we had. There's a little bit of truth on both sides. The truth is always like somewhere in the middle between the two. Any final words for our audience?
Just keep doing what we're doing and, give us feedback. I am one that does not want to just do something and call it a day. I want to hear from others and how they feel, what they think we can improve on. The robot aspect, love everybody's opinion on that. How exactly do you feel? Do you think that we should be scared, or do you think that, we can use them, but we don't necessarily think they're going to take over our jobs?
Chris, great having you on again. Really amazing conversation. Appreciate it. Everybody, thank you so much for watching us today. Take care, y'all. We'll see you next time.